Joining us. Thank you for joining us for this midweek E3G huddle on the state of play in the negotiations. My name is Alden Meyer. I'm a Senior Associate with E3G in our Washington office. Joining me today is Rob Moore, who is the Director of our Public Banks Program and also former lead finance negotiator for the UK. He is based in our London office, and Mulio Alvarez, expert and researcher on NCQG and loss and damage and adaptation issues. She's based out of our Brussels office. We will be giving some introductory comments and then opening it up for questions. If you like, you can put your questions in the Q&A function. And we can answer some of them on the Q&A function and others live. Rob is going to have to leave us about 5 minutes before the end of the briefing to get to a 5:30 meeting in another part of the venue. So he will go right after me when I give a little framing remarks. And if you have questions for him, you can put them in the Q&A function. He can answer some of them before he has to leave, and then others once we open it up. We are at the middle of the second week. We've heard today the president's way forward. We heard updates from the 4 pairs of ministers that he's put in charge of political consultations with other ministers and groups of countries on 4 of the key issues here: the new collective quantified goal for post-2025 climate finance, mitigation, adaptation, and the Article 6 rules negotiations. We expect to see new texts on each of those issues as well as several others over the course of the night. They were promised around midnight with others at 7 a.m. My prediction from being at a few of these rodeos is that means probably more likely 3, 4, or 5 a.m. So many of us will have early mornings looking over text with our morning coffee, which is always enjoyable. And we will be prepared to answer and respond to your questions tomorrow after we've been able to go through those new texts. He then said that he would ask the ministers to be available for consultations with parties tomorrow after groups have had a chance to look through the text. He would convene a sort of meeting in the round with all the ministers around all of the issues to hear reactions, concerns, recommendations for improvements, and then there would be a second iteration of texts coming at some time. I don't think he specified a time frame for that. My sense, given how these things traditionally work, is it will take a fair amount of time for groups to consult, particularly the G77, which has a diversity of regional groups and country groups. Will take some time to consult. We don't know yet when he will convene the all ministerial meeting tomorrow, so stay tuned for that. So with that, let me turn it over to Rob to give you a little rundown on the state of play of the NCQG negotiations. Rob, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Alden. I will try and keep this reasonably brief so that we can zero in on the questions that you guys have. So first, just relating the process that Alden just described to the NCQG. So firstly, the NCQG compared to a typical COP negotiating item has a wide amount of outstanding issues to work through. So everything from the qualitative commitments that are made around how finance is delivered, to the level of the goal, to the shape and structure of the goal, to the contributors of the goal, to the reporting framework around it, to the work plan between now and whenever the goal is implemented and the date that it will be implemented, are all still open. And that means that there'll be quite a heavy burden on those producing the text this evening, and then hopefully turning it around into another iteration when they can, to get as much right as they can. So the text that comes out today will be the first time that we've seen something that has been produced through presidency and ministerial consultations as opposed to at the technical level, which will be a sort of big step forward and probably shape how discussions go from that point onwards. So much will depend on what that text looks like. In practice, the things that we are seeing really being focused in on the ground here firstly, the question around the contributor base and how do the commitments that in recent days have been made to climate finance by China, but with the accompanying notion that they wouldn't be necessarily captured on the same basis as the existing contributors. How does that look in an actual decision and an actual goal? And what is a sort of constructive compromise on that? So how can we end up with a goal in which that finance is recognised, but that countries are still comfortable that it's within the parameters of what was agreed under the Paris Agreement, and that will need to be thought through. There's a lot of discussions around what the level of the support component or the inner core of the goal will look like. And there's been lots of rumours and discussions going through the centre around developed countries sort of zero in on a range that goes in the sort of 200 to 300 space, and how that might be received by developing countries, given that a lot of the focus going in was something a lot bigger than that. But it does feel on the ground, and you're seeing quite a lot of the sort of veterans of the process who are always trying to get the most ambition possible are trying to rally some support towards getting even to the upper end of that range. Feels like quite a lift for some of the developed countries. So that looks like where the politics currently are. And then looking at that, what does that mean for where we go from here? So something will be proposed. If it's agreed to, it's unlikely that it's going to be in that sort of range that was talked about before the COP. And so what does that mean around how we go forward and how we ensure that the setting of this goal is the start of something that leads to that transformational change that countries need to see, and to the scale of support that is needed. So those feel like the three really critical issues that will need to be resolved over the coming days: the contributor base, the level of that inner bit of the goal that is around the core support, and if that is not judged to be enough in of itself, what assurances can be given that there is a way forward that will more fully respond to the needs that developing countries are facing. There's also an aspect on whether there will be individual sub-goals and how assurance can be given on the quality of the finance. So to what degree is it grant-based, and to what degree does it go towards adaptation in developing countries, which we know is really important for them. And Anna may say a little bit more on that when she gives you an update on adaptation. So Alden, I'll end it there. Happy to take questions in the chat and also the verbal time that we have until I need to leave. Thanks. Back to you, Alden, and then Anna, I think.
Thanks, Rob. And if you do have questions for Rob, please put them in the chat. Before I go to Anna, Rob, could you say a little bit about the timing of all this? I watched Commissioner Hoekstra's press conference from the EU today, and he was asked, when are you going to put out the number? And he basically said, well, we have to solve all these things simultaneously: the contributor base, the quality and scope, and the number. And that makes me think we're looking at pretty near the end of the game before we see the number. Is that your sense?
So I think there will be a difference between what is said in the room versus what is said outside of the room. So I would imagine that those conversations are happening in corridors at the moment, and that there will be I know that there are delegates that are having conversations with the European Union and other donors that are a little bit informed by what they're willing and able to sort of put on the table with their political mandates that they have. It does have that slight risk of chicken and egg, and I think some combination of parties is going to need to come together with a movement that goes from we're not going to say anything until we hear Y to we're prepared to go here, but we need to see X. So I think there needs to be some sort of movement. It's not clear who that's going to come from. In this process, that tends to work best if it's a collaboration of developed and developing countries speaking to each other, as opposed to in one group. And I think we're going to need to sort of see some of that bridge building behind the scenes. Obviously, there's not too long left, so a lot is going to need to move in the text in a very short space of time. And so I would be quite worried if we don't see that movement in the next couple of days. At the same time, I would expect, having been to these discussions at COPs and been on the other side of the table, that it wouldn't be surprising at all for these things to be the final agreement, in the hope that it can be reached, to be quite late in the process. And we who knows whether we're in for a very late COP or just a sort of late running one, but we'll find out.
Thanks, Rob. And yeah, I've seen several betting pools online if you want to make your entry and guess when we're actually when the gavel comes down in Baku. But that's my sense as well. This is going to be one of the last things resolved. And just a tip for reporters on the call, there's obviously going to be a lot of speculation, a lot of spinning, a lot of projecting numbers, either from anonymous sources, or I even saw some reporting today that was citing NGOs that were willing to go on the record and putting those numbers in the headline. So just be careful on this. There's going to be a lot of rumors and information, and sometimes maybe misinformation flying around the halls in the next couple of days. Anna, let me turn it over to you. We've obviously seen the adaptation issue make limited progress in some spaces, others almost gridlock last week at the negotiator level. We've got the ministers now taking over, conducting the political consultations. What's your sense? Are things starting to move? Is the ice starting to break on adaptation? Maybe that's the wrong metaphor, but yeah, over to you.
Good one. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with Rob about the need of, really turning to bridge building at this point. Something that we had been proposing for a long time was that sub-goal and adaptation could be that first bridge to move that would build the trust and confidence so that everything else could fall in place. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that has happened yet. We're still confident that there will be some sort of component on the NCQG on adaptation. And we hope to see it very soon, because again, we believe it will be key to unlocking ambition everywhere else. Across adaptation rooms, so we've had a lot of items at this COP. We've had items on the adaptation committee, NAPS, etc., and of course the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation. And we've seen a lot of procedural conclusions and moving of items to SB62, so the mid-year conference in Bonn. And today, for example, that happened with national adaptation plans. And I think that that's the result of kind of all eyes being on the NCQG to deliver finance for all these other agenda items. So for an example, the adaptation committee is struggling to produce their work and to translate it into all the languages that it should be translated because of the lack of finance. National adaptation plans are not coming in because a lot of developing countries are not seeing the incentive to implement them. They don't have the finance to carry them. Or implement them. So everyone's really looking towards the NCQG to deliver or to give the confidence that the finance will flow for adaptation, and national adaptation plans will be backed with means of implementation. The adaptation committee will get support so that they can support themselves, developing countries. And of course, the kind of big ticket item at this COP is a global goal on adaptation, which is undergoing a 2-year work program. We're halfway through now on developing indicators to the targets of these goals. Targets can be found online, and it's quite technical, but basically what we're looking for is that this new goal on adaptation has teeth and that has indicators that can measure progress towards the goal. And that means including means of implementation and input. So again, very connected to the new climate finance goal, and we hope that there will be a strong linkage between these two goals so that they can support each other. On loss and damage, and actually I should also add, we saw yesterday a new pledge for the adaptation fund of 60 million, which is quite encouraging and puts us around 50% to the final goal of the adaptation fund of 300 million. And I know that these figures seem small, but the adaptation fund is actually a very small fraction of the finance that goes to adaptation. So, we know that the developed country report and the doubling goal of adaptation going up to around 38 billion by 2025 shows we are on track to meet that, which is quite positive. So I encourage not to have too much negativity because of the adaptation fund still. Please, we need to encourage leaders to contribute to the fund, but it's a wider picture, and we hope that countries do meet the doubling. Still, the doubling is only 5% of the adaptation gap, which stands at 366 billion in the higher range. Regarding loss and damage, we also saw some pledges, $30 million from Australia yesterday, but very slow progress in the actual room regarding the location of the Santiago network for loss and damage, which provides technical support to countries. And yeah, again, all eyes on NCQG. So I'll leave it here.
Thanks, Anna. And just to put in perspective, I said this in Dubai last year after we got the $800 million in initial pledges for the Loss and Damage Fund. That's a good start. Obviously, much more is needed, tens if not hundreds of billions of dollars. And I contrasted that with the $3.5 billion a day that we are still paying in taxpayer subsidies for production and consumption of fossil fuels, which of course is making loss and damage worse. So this is kind of the definition of insanity. And hopefully we will see that issue taken up over the next year. Let me just say a little bit about mitigation, which has been a pretty constricted and toxic space in the first week of the negotiations. I think, as everyone's aware, very polarized views about what should happen with the UAE dialogue on the global stocktake. Should it be limited to just finance or cover finance plus the other issues in the stocktake? Could it start to look at implementation of the elements of the stocktake and how those are reflected in NDCs as they come in, and other issues? On that one, we had a procedural decision forwarded to the Conference of the Parties to the Paris Agreement. On the other one, the mitigation work program, it was even worse. It was a very polarized debate, main division between the Arab group of countries led by Saudi Arabia and the like-minded group of countries on one side versus all the developed countries and a number of the developing country groups, the AOSIS group, the LDCs, the ILAC group of progressive Latin countries, etc. And the main fault line there, I think, is can we make the mitigation work program a constructive space to actually start breaking down some of the barriers to implementation of decarbonization in sectors, which was the original purpose it was set up from. At the end of the day, the like-minded developing countries and the Arab group were not willing to even agree to a procedural decision, which said basically we came, we met, we negotiated, we couldn't reach consensus, and so we're forwarding this issue to the meeting of the parties under Paris for further negotiations. In the second week, they said they couldn't even live with that, and they blocked the procedural decision, which left the chairs of the subsidiary bodies no choice but to declare it would have to be postponed to their next session in Bonn under Rule 16. And so, you know, that was the situation Saturday night. You saw in the closing plenary a sort of rebellion against that, led by the UK, but also joined in by a number of countries and country groups representing some 125 countries in total, which said we're not willing to accept that answer. We want to have a solid, robust mitigation element of this package. So it sort of came back from the dead like Lazarus, and now we're in the middle of ministerial consultations led by ministers from Norway and South Africa on what the mitigation component of this decision could be. Brazil has been particularly active in the room, saying this needs to be a robust engagement. It needs to be a problem-solving space, not a gridlocked negotiating space. They have actually started a consultation process with the document they're circulating and asking for countries to give them feedback, input, constructive suggestions. And they're also feeding that back into the ministerial discussion. So progress is being made. It's grudging to some extent. There's still a lot of challenges from some parties about getting this over the finish line in the negotiations last night, which went until after 10 p.m. One of the final comments was from China saying that parties had to be aware that if they push too far with elements around implementation of the global stock take that might force them to again invoke Rule 16. And so this is still not a done deal by any means, but I think under the leadership of the ministers, we're making some progress, and we will see what the text put forward is tomorrow. There's a number of issues we have not discussed: women and gender, human rights, unilateral measures, etc. We can answer any questions you want to put in the Q&A function on that. Anna, I know you'd like to come back in just for a minute and say something about the package. Let me do that, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Alden. Yeah, I just wanted to really stress that even though finance is obviously at the center of this COP, as it's been rightly called the finance COP, we really do need a number of outcomes beyond finance, because there really is not enough finance for us to cope with a 3-4 degree warmer world. So mitigation is still incredibly critical, that we get a strong signal from countries that they are, going to implement the GST, which they agreed to last year. We need countries to commit to enhancing resilience. So really looking forward to this NCQG being agreed and have it be ambitious, but we really need outcomes across the board to ensure that there is a good, strong outcome and good climate action. That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. That's important. They call it means of implementation for a reason. It's not ends of implementation. Money is a tool to drive resilience, to drive a capacity to deal with the mounting impacts of climate change, and to fuel decarbonization of the global economy. So this is going to have to be, at the end of the day, a package deal. It's not going to be a one issue only deal, and my prediction is if there isn't a strong outcome on mitigation as well as adaptation, there's not going to be a strong outcome on the finance package. So let's open it up. I see that Simon, you have a hand raised in the chat. I'll open it up for your question, and you can also put questions in the Q&A, which we will take. So Sanan, over to you. Can you unmute yourself, Sanan? You have your hand up? If not, I'll go to the question in the Q&A, which is from Simon Evans. Text being circulated by Brazil, is that MWP text, or would it live somewhere else? It's not MWP text in the sense of a text from the co-facilitators. It's a text that Brazil has developed and is circulating to other parties for their input and reaction and inviting comments. I don't think it's even been tabled as a conference room paper, which is sort of another tool that countries sometimes use. So I would encourage you to reach out to the Brazilian delegation and ask them about that. I don't know if they have made that public yet, but it was mentioned in the room last night by the Brazilian negotiator that they would welcome reactions from other parties to that text. I think they're hoping it can be perhaps the core of a solution to the food fight that's been going on in the mitigation work program space. Sanan, are you with us, or are you not able to make your question? If not, we'll go to the other questions. Okay, let's see. When is the next briefing? Well, we expect to get the texts, as I said at the beginning, overnight. My prediction is not midnight, but maybe I'll be pleasantly surprised. More likely early morning. So when we've been able to review those texts and have some analysis to give you, we will be scheduling the next briefing. So please stay tuned. Any meetings happening today or tomorrow where we can attend to follow the NCQG? I don't think so. Rob can correct me. I think all the negotiations are going on behind closed doors. Now, the president did ask the ministers to give him their report on the state of play, and also the co-facilitators to provide their take on the state of play in terms of text, but I don't think any of that is going to be public. Is that right, Rob? There's nothing public to watch on NCQG. I don't know, Rob, if you want to
One
come in
thing,
on
there's the only thing
quantum.
I'd say that I think there's a presser at 5 o'clock that Can Europe is arranging with a few developing country ministers on the NCQG, but there's no formal negotiations.
Okay, and then can you say what your take is on whether there's been any progress on the quantum? I mean, you addressed what's going to happen there, but is your sense that there's momentum, parties are talking to each other and they're moving closer to a compromise?
Yes. So I don't know that it's necessarily true that I don't know if it's necessarily true that parties are currently moving towards a compromise. I would say that there is an increasing solidification on what is likely to be on offer from the current developed countries, and there are numbers circulating the hall that we alluded to earlier in the sort of 200 to 300 range. None of those have been formally confirmed. That's obviously a lot less than what has been asked for, but I do sense a slight moving of perhaps the goal that is agreed at this COP won't, if it's agreed, won't be the full extent of the story, and some feeling that we need to sort of make sure that there's a mechanism to continue the conversation and look to sort of go beyond whatever is agreed at this COP, looking into other sort of potential sources of finance that are not currently cooked into some of those, still public finance, but from different sources, including some of the levies that we've heard talked about in the rooms quite a lot, and have been being worked on outside the rooms for a number of years. The other thing that so there was a question on what text to look for. So the text itself will be the text that's released by on the former UNFCCC website. That will hopefully be stripped down quite a lot from some of the very lengthy text that had lots of options in it. Because when you get to this stage of a negotiating process, you need to have well-structured options to look at. So that's the text that I'd look for, and I think in particular keep a focus on the paragraphs that relate to the quantum and the scope of the goals. So where we're talking about what the core is, what the public finance amount is, that'll be the thing that's really the focus of attention. So I would sort of zero in on that in the text, and then there will be a whole range of other aspects that are more around the way in which the goal will be implemented and the type of finance that will be available. I think that will be more negotiable, and I can see parties aligning on that. The really political stuff is around the contributor base and the level of that inner bit of the goal.
Okay, thank you, Rob. And I see the question in the chat about the developing country press conference. It was scheduled for 5 p.m. By the Climate Action Network. I was seeing some WhatsApp texts at 5:06 that it hadn't started yet, so maybe there was a delay. But you may need to look for that on the webcast archived if that's almost wrapping up now. It was originally supposed to be from 5 to 5:30. So I don't know if that has actually happened and been concluded, but I would check that out later tonight. You can probably watch it on the archived webcast. Are there any other questions for the speakers? What is the issue? Oh, the issue the Arab group objects to on mitigation. That's a long question. It's multiple issues. Basically, they are saying that they think developed countries and the developing countries that want an ambitious mitigation program are trying to impose new obligations on countries to put pressure on them to change their NDCs after they come out or to create new sectoral targets. Of course, I have not heard that from any of the negotiators from developed countries or from the developing country groups that want a strong MWP in the room, but that is clearly the perception that the Arab group has. And of course, this has been a long-standing concern since the mitigation work program was created a couple of years ago. There have been countries that have systematically tried to constrain it, limit it, even some that proposed at the beginning that it only be a one-year program, not a multi-year program as it now is. I would especially single out Saudi Arabia, which has relentlessly tried to slow down and obstruct progress in this space. Even 1 year ago in Bonn, they said that we should not have more discussions in the mitigation work program space because there wasn't enough progress being made in the adaptation rooms. When we checked back with our adaptation colleagues, we found out it was the Saudis that were delaying progress in the adaptation room so that they could come to the mitigation room and say we shouldn't move forward. So there's some very cynical behavior going on by that particular party. You can read a story by Lisa Friedman in the New York Times, which says how they have systematically this year tried to undermine and obliterate any reference to the fossil fuel transition language they agreed to in Dubai a year ago in the global stocktake. But I would let you look into that for yourself and come to your own conclusions. My own sense is they have not really been acting in this space in good faith to preserve a constructive and ambitious mitigation program. With that, I think we're going to need to wrap it up. As I said, we will let you know when we are doing our next briefing. I think, Rob, maybe you can get back to David Fogarty about his question about the likely outcome and agreement on the scale and sourcing of financing, because I know you have to run to another room. And Adarsh, I don't know if we can maybe refer you to another colleague on the UAE Declaration on Food and Agriculture. Sadly, that is not an issue that E3G has a lot of capacity or engagement in here in Baku, but I assume that Ria can refer you to a colleague in another organization to talk to about that program on food and agriculture.
Yeah, just to answer the question before I go, so I can answer it quickly, David. That would be, I don't want to speculate too much, but that would be my best guess of what an outcome is likely to be, which is that, you know, we lock in what can be agreed here, but then we acknowledge that there's actually more that needs to be done. And what form that more takes, I'm not sure, whether it's a sort of revisiting the goal a bit down the line or some sort of wider process around resource mobilization. But I think something like that is the most likely outcome at this stage.
Thanks a lot, Rob, and thank you, Anna, and happy birthday yesterday. It was wonderful to celebrate with you. We will keep you tuned as to when our next briefing will be after we see the text, and we are sending out WhatsApp blasts every morning. If you're not on the list for that and would like to be, please let Ria Amin know with our comms team. Thank you, everyone, very much, and stay tuned.
Thank you, Alden.
Stay hydrated. Get some rest, because my prediction is the next few nights are going to be quite late. Take care, everyone.
Bye.